Welcome to the Invisible to Invincible podcast. Today, we are talking about how to make sales for your business without being salesy. And I know that it is something that many people struggle with. So, whether you decided you're not good at sales, whether you hate the idea of sales, or whether you're amazing at it and just want to listen to someone who's an expert at sales and see what you can learn. Today's guest, Alison Mullins, is the CEO of Rep Methods LLC and has more than 20 years experience in sales, marketing, and helping companies grow. We talked about a lot of different topics around sales and marketing and what it takes, including how women can thrive in a male dominated industry like construction. She even turned the tables on me and asked me a couple questions about how I've worked with salespeople and what sales approach worked better on me in the past. If you're looking to master the art of selling without feeling salesy, then you're in the right place. This is where you want to be. So grab your favorite beverage. I've got my iced coffee right here and stick around. Let's go. Welcome, Allison. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Kendra. I'm looking forward to this.
When I saw your name and I looked at what you do, I was really excited to have you on because Allison is excellent at sales and coaching, and she has a business around that. The mindset required to be selling and to have that expertise, I think, is something that many people dream about because it seems elusive. First of all, Allison, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do right now?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. I'm Allison. I'm about 25 years in sales. I got my start in high school with a telemarketing company. Then I moved into retail, sold clothes, and started a career in New York City. And then somehow found my way into the construction industry. And I've been in construction materials since 2011. After COVID, I was thinking outside the box. What can we do with our lives? I was also thinking of ways that I could supplement income besides holding that 9 to 5 scenario. I started a sales training company at the request of some of my clients, Washington, D.C. area, who would constantly bombard me with, come train my salespeople. Come teach my people how much you're amazing. All that ego stuff. It's hard starting a company, but I managed to do that. I also have the amazing support of a company in Italy who is run by a woman, one of the CEOs there. It's brother and sister, but she is a powerhouse. It's very rare in the stone surfaces industry to find, not especially in Italy, an Italian woman who's running the show. She also has me do business development and sales for her in the North American market. I wear a lot of hats and give a lot of my time in the volunteer world, help me keep connected. I consider myself an anti-marketer. I don't really want to be the pushy salesperson. That's not the sales that I believe in. I'd rather try to build attraction that if you what I got going on and you think that it's pretty awesome and it's a good fit for your company, then I hope we can work together. That's about as pushy as I really want to get. I'm not into finagling people or harping on big deals or getting all caught in the run.
There's so many things that you just said that I want to take apart. I'm so excited to talk to you. Sometimes I feel my interview style is more golden retriever than actual. I have yes, definite part squirrel. I'm like, I have questions for you. Before I forget, these are the things that I want to ask you about. I'm just going to list them off because we're going to talk about them. I want to talk about being a woman in construction and doing sales. Two, I want to talk about getting into sales and being the unmarketing sales because not many people want to be salesy, particularly more introverts or women over a certain age. It's harder when you look online and when you look and you see everyone's younger. And there's this idea and image that business owners are younger. And the reality is the numbers, that's not true. It's just when you look online, that's the perception we all see because that's who's out there and doing things. I want to touch on that. And then third, I want to talk about the power of the approach for sales and being yourself and not being pushy and focusing on connections over how much money can I get out of you.
Yeah, it's this honesty is the best policy thing. If you want, I'll just jump right in on that. I found early on, there was a couple of things. I'm from rural Appalachia. My upbringing in coal mining country helped here because I grew up with blue collar parents, blue collar stuff going on in my life, and this attitude of everybody means something. Everybody has a value to bring. When I first got into outside sales, that started to shine because I was given a territory that had, yes, big city, but I also had these small, tiny communities going towards Tennessee and North Carolina. These are not huge breadwinners. These are not major producing companies. This is something where a company might be able to give the company I'm working for 1 to 10 orders a year, like not a lot of money. Right. I did choose at that time to give the same amount of attention that I could. You're going to spend more time with the higher producing revenue streaming companies. But I chose to always make time to visit some of those companies and spend the time in their showrooms and educate them on product and trends and things that were going on in the industry as a whole. Through those connections I made, I got a lot of good feeling, good vibes, positivity, not only sales, but just positivity towards the industry, the product, the brand. Little did I know that 6 years later, I very much built a reputation around like I was the face of this company. Mm-hmm. And that was such a valuable type of selling because it was very relationship based and about being a problem solver, coming to the table with as much information that you can to find a solution for people, and to also be honest and give people another solution that may not be yours in the process. People value what you have to say. They value you as a person. They like salespeople who just want to see the very best outcome for everybody without it being a sales pitch. And to me, that type of selling is what has led me to where I am today. Honesty is the best policy, relationship building, and also valuing the little guys. I do really think that the practice I needed early on, being able to hold a conversation with all different levels of players in the field, from top tier CEOs of major construction companies, all the way down to a woodworker in a wood shop out in the middle of nowhere, and being able to give them value and also bring value to them as a product manager, an educator, a salesperson, whatever you want to call it. That was a lot. I hope that it gives you more to work off of.
I really like to hear that. One of the things that I always thought was interesting, my first job, I did sales support for an international computer consulting organization, and they were very revenue driven and very numbers driven, as many organizations are, particularly in the sales department. It was fascinating because there was a variety of salespeople. I was in Colorado at the time, and there was the old school salesperson. She was in everyone's faces trying just to get the sale, get the sale, get the sale. And then there was the person who moved from New York and was relaxing, but he did sales. And I would see him just shooting the shit with people, getting sales that he needed. But the third one was the most interesting because she was the junior salesperson. And she came in and she focused on relationships. She had this company that she met with once a month, every quarter, whatever the duration was. She didn't have any business and she would get a lot of pressure from her style, but she put in that work and she would get a few sales here and there. But 2 years later, when the other salesperson was struggling because she hadn't focused on the relationship, she'd focus on the numbers. This junior salesperson had the biggest book of business. She had the best reputation because she was doing all of those things that you're talking about. I didn't even think about it until you were talking about it. It's such an interesting way to look at it, as getting to know people and how can you help them versus here's what I have.
It's true. And I talk a lot about merchandising, building that trust with clients. It took a long time for me to become a powerhouse in surfaces. I remember being passionate about it early on. I often talk about that passion and finding that subject matter. If you're an entrepreneur, and you're starting a business, you're passionate about what you're doing. You've got a vision, you've got this thing that you want to sell. And it's just as important to merchandise who you're selling to, and then also to become that expert.
Yeah.
Someone that they rely on so that you're the first call. In my first book, which was called The Art of Selling, that was a big section about becoming the first call. I found early on that if I took on a new business development role for a company, it would take me about 6 months to really work that territory. The first 6 months of any job in business development is the hardest.
Mhm.
You got to be there on repeat. And like what you're describing, that first, the older salesperson, I probably have a little bit of her attributes, a little bit of all three of those you
Yeah.
mentioned that cross a lot of those lines, because I like old school. I like thank you notes. I like thank you cards. I like touches of appreciation that I feel is lost in the
Yep.
younger generation. I'm a firm believer in some of that stuff. I'm also about getting in people's faces in the sense that as much as like the world is transitioning towards AI and computer and all of this stuff, which I use too, I believe the in-person one-on-one relationship you can create with a person is priceless, and it will never go away, regardless of who's getting the leads, how many computers are dialing for you. There's nothing like being with someone in the same room and hashing out a conversation.
It's true. When I've done in-person client workshops or taken the time to do those things when location allows, it does make a big difference. And I think that for me, the second biggest one has been video podcasting and live streaming, because here I am authentically. You can ask me questions and it's live. So God knows what's going to come out of my mouth sometimes.
I find this to be very intimate too. I enjoy the podcast. So spending time in my vehicle, I learn a lot, and it's a nice way to capture my time back and listen in on what else is going on. Somewhat of an intimate conversation too. And having Zoom meetings 101, I think we've all gotten there. We've had enough
Yeah.
practice in the last few years that there's a way to build an intimacy there too. There are some other parts and pieces that have to go along with that. The follow up, listing out the next steps, giving clear instructions on how to move forward. There are just things that are a little bit different when you get the opportunity to be with people one on one and in person.
Absolutely. And I'm going to shamelessly plug my book, Digital Etiquette for Dummies, about how to add those personal touches to your meetings, to your communication, and to those times when you can't meet with people in person.
Oh, that was so perfect. I promise everybody, she did not tell me. She was
I was
not, we were
like,
not
she walked
setting her
right
up.
into it,
But look
and
at that.
I'm just gonna jump on it. And so we're there. But it's absolutely true. When you have the opportunity, I truly think it's an honor to have a podcast and a platform to bring people like you on. And it's an honor to me that people listen, because I think there's so many insights that can be gained from hearing conversations like this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Honestly, between you, me, and whoever's listening, I think there's a value for women to be showing up in these areas. When I look at the top sales books, the top business books, the top podcasts, the top YouTube videos, they're all typically men. Business book recommendations, when it comes to sales, marketing, anything along those lines, they're all men, and it drives me nuts. So being able to help lift women's voices, especially people like you who are writing and have written books.
It means a lot. When I wrote the first book, I had to. It was like, I need a platform. I need to get all this stuff out of my brain and get it down on paper. I wanted people to buy the book. But I didn't read any other sales books. I didn't research what other authors were out there, because I was so biased on making sure that everything that was down in that book was coming out of my brain, and there was no other influence. There was no AI, no help. It was just about 15 years of outside sales on paper. When I did finally launch the book, and I took a moment to see the other authors that are out there and all the ancient works. There's actually a book called The Art of Selling written by a man like 30 years ago. I do have a separate subtitle which separates me, but it was an honor to be a woman in that space. being a woman in this space has its ebbs and flows. I've come across a lot of strong women in this world, and there are those that are going to lift us up, and there are others that are going to break you down. I'm just happy to, most of the time, keep the confidence to keep going and just keep that vision of what I want to help and bring to this earth. And I don't have any kids, so this might be the only thing that gets left behind when I'm gone. So.
Thank you for that reminder. I do need to write another book. So that one's not the only one is my book of rules. It's really fascinating. And this is totally not on my list of things I said I want to talk to you about, but a little bit it is, because when I graduated with my MBA, I was doing some work with a company outside of Indiana. It was a biological engineering company. And they put me on a project to help with PR and communications for a military weapons demilitarization project. On that project, it was myself and this older woman. And I think there's something to be said. And I really want to credit the women of the generation, like boomer, older Gen X, but particularly boomer women in fields like chemical weapon demilitarization, construction, or tech, or whatever it is, pick one, right? Because the attitude and the persona that she had in order to navigate that area was tremendous. Half the time it annoyed me because I was like, why are you this way? But when I would see her in action dealing with the other men who were of the same generation, I got it. There is something to be said for sure for those women that had to adopt those traits in order to grow, survive, and thrive in that industry. And
Yeah.
I think now we can do it somewhat our own way, but we still have to adopt some of those approaches because it is important to communicate with people how they're used to being communicated with.
If you want to enlighten us with some of the nuances of the personality that you're referring to, I'd love to hear that from another perspective. I'll also tell you a quick story because that happened to me too. There's 11% of the construction industry is women. Mm-hmm. So I know you wanted a little fact and figure there. And the construction industry as a whole, I'm in construction materials. There are GCs, project managers, which is also a field that was dominated by men, people who are actually out in the field that are women, never existed before. But in sales, women often lead the pack. Mm-hmm. Honestly, we're a dime a dozen. And so on the material side, being a rep and things like that, women are a lot more common. I was traveling with a younger up and coming sales rep. I was training her a few years ago. We were in a territory together and she came out of this particular business. I had let her go inside to do her thing. She came out to the car crying as she got with tears rolling down her cheeks. She said, I think I understand why you are the way you are. I can laugh about it now, but that hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah. You know, there's two parts of that conversation. What is your perception of me and my personality? And then what is it about you crying right now and this exact situation that made you all of a sudden understand me more? That's sad to have to go through those types of situations. But in my line of work, we often have to deal with domineering styles of men. Can be women too. It's not always limited to men, but a domineering individual, and we have to be domineering in return. I did a stint in New York too, so I've got a bit of that brash and direct mentality. It's a dog eat dog kind of world when you work in Manhattan, when you work around the city of any kind. That directness, the brashness, the sturdiness, the not being willing to be walked all over. These are traits that I find have had to emerge, whether I like it or not, whether I like that even about myself. Those are the common themes of being a woman in business, in sales, and especially in a male-dominated world.
She wasn't even in sales and you nailed it, right? Very domineering, very abrasive. this is what I did. For example, I think it's an interesting nuance to pay attention to because we're not all in businesses where we're dealing with women. Some people and a lot of people are in industries and have businesses that deal a lot with men, and there's different types of men, there's different types of women. One example is that I would travel with this woman. We were in the same hotel. We'd meet at the airport. We'd get the rental car. I like to drive, so I was typically the driver. I would drive Miss Daisy around and we were together morning to evening, go back to get dinner, go back to the hotel. Every time we were in Dayton, Ohio, it was the same 4 days nonstop by each other's side. One night at dinner, she was telling me the story, and I'd had to leave for a little while to run an errand and then came back. She was telling a story about how she marched into the office and told them what, and I was like, was that when I was there? Because what I saw was no marching. I did not see telling him. I saw asking him. It was an interesting insight into her
Perspective.
own perspective.
Mhm.
But I also saw her be that person, just not to the extent she thought she was. It was a fascinating disconnect because I literally was like, "Did she do that twice? Was I
Was I
there for that?
away? Did
Was
I
that
miss?
the 20 minutes I wasn't next to her?" But it was just interesting because she had worn this persona for so long that it was most of her at this point in time, and all of her communications, except for very rarely. And it's something to consider because I know when I did work in New York, I had to take on that persona. I would spend the whole drive to the office from the airport putting on my armor basically and
Yeah,
putting
you got to
on
put on your armor. If you've ever dealt with any of these guys on Wall Street or the strong Long Island New Yorker type, it's just not for the faint of heart because I don't know why we get louder and bolder the more we feel like we have to stand tall. But you know,
how do you navigate that with sales and building relationships? Let's bring it back to that.
I teach a lot about reading the room. I like to teach my students about adapting to the environment in which they are presented. So when it comes to sales, this is really relevant for people who sell windows and have to go into random homes. They're dealing with a lot of different personalities on a daily basis. People who work in showrooms, right, and they don't know what's walking in the door. This is extremely relevant for someone who is an entrepreneur going out there getting business and encountering random cold calls from lead generation. I try to teach people to do as much research you can as the upcoming client that you have, learning as many of the psychographics, not the demographics of a person. I hate that we got into this men versus women thing. I hope I didn't alienate any of your listeners. I'm an advocate for all sexes, no matter what they are. Demographically speaking, there are all these categories that are
Right.
predefined for us.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying men versus women. I'm saying right? Like
Yeah.
it's how you communicate in different scenarios. And I think there is something to be said for understanding how to best communicate with the audience. If the audience is a male dominated, I worked in tech for a long time. It's going to be a male dominated area, at least then. It's understanding respect and communication.
I like to talk about diving into those psychographic abilities to generalize. It is
Mhm.
generalizing, but if you're going to be selling to someone, learning to have some intuition and reading a person is part of that game. It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice. In a way, it could be interpreted as being judgmental, right? You can look at it in two different sides of the coin. When you're in sales, you have to read the room and understand what side of the playing field you need to be on to create a better balanced conversation, a good relationship, how to not piss somebody off, right? So I talk about it in terms of, am I going to be an elephant in this meeting or a mouse? Who's on the other side of the boardroom table? What kind of audience am I selling to? And what role do I need to play? I call that chameleoning. Some of my haters might call it being fake. I don't like the term fake because I think that for me, I'm as real as I can be in every conversation and whether I'm selling or being a human. I might temper my tone. I might not curse as much in some meetings where in others I feel more comfortable. Whether or not I'm going to have a cigarette in the parking lot afterwards might be something that I might not do with this client over here. And those are my character flaws that I feel I have to work around and balance in order to be more accepted amongst the people around me. And that to me is intuition selling, knowing who you're talking to.
I used to work with a salesperson and I was his client. There was a point where he was asking, I was going to introduce him to someone else in the university where I was working, and he was asking who they were. So he looked them up online on LinkedIn, and he started going through their profile. He was like, okay, so they went to college this
That's right.
way, and it looks like they overlapped work. So it looks like they put them through college, so that like he was doing this whole analysis, and it wasn't judgmental at all. It's just trying to understand
Where the person's
motivation.
coming from.
And I was like, okay, do me next. I know you know me, but try it. Let's see if your guess would have been right.
Yeah, I often correlate being a really great intuitive salesperson with being an FBI agent.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in my career, I was put into a position of business development and I was in a different city every week, and I may not ever see the people again. I had to learn, because it's definitely a learned behavior, what was going to make sense to the client in front of me
Mm-hmm.
in 60 seconds. I might have 30 seconds to get in the room, and then I'm going to have about 60 seconds to make a difference. And that's going to be the determining factor on whether or not I'm going to get to stay longer and whether or not I'm going to get to come back.
How did you do that? How did you learn? Or is that in your book?
I think that's a big part of what I was talking about, chameleoning and learning to size up, learning to do research. We're talking about the top 500 interior designers and architects in the country. We're talking about highly educated people, people who are way smarter than me, people who know things that I could dream of knowing. And I think walking into a sales position with a little bit of expertise, but also humility and recognizing what I bring to the table, what I think they want from me. I need to make that the most relevant part of the conversation as quickly as possible. I want to respect somebody else's time. I want to get that lightning bolt of attraction going as quickly as possible so that we can continue the conversation. Otherwise, I'm just going to sound like every other person that has knocked down their door every single day for the last 50 years. I was down in Miami working the other week, and I have found that a lot of the clients don't answer emails anymore. There are certain markets that if you send them an email, they're probably actually going to block you. But if you pick up the phone, make a quick pitch, and actually ask if you can drop by and show them something, you're more likely to get a yes to that. And then you still only have 30, 60 seconds, because these people get hounded. There's billions of dollars of construction running through that territory. Can you imagine the amount of suppliers, contractors, companies who are bombarding them daily? I have mad respect for their time, and I think that helps me.
When I worked at the university, I ran the marketing for 30, 40 plus campuses across several states. Every market person would call me because everyone gave them my name. And the people who had done the time to make sure what they were pitching was relevant had to be respectful. And I will tell you to this day that the nemesis was the person from the post office who decided that he was going to work with me, even though I wasn't the right person, pulled me out of a meeting. It was such a desperation on his side, but it was so disrespectful. So I was in a meeting with my team, and the receptionist called me out of my meeting and was like, Kendra, this person's here for your meeting. I was like, I don't have anything scheduled. I don't even know who that is. But she keeps insisting that he was supposed to meet with you. So I interrupted what I was doing, came out, and looking back, I feel bad. It was an older gentleman. He was probably under pressure for his numbers. But I was so angry because he had pulled me out. I'd never seen him before. And he said, this is what I need to talk to you about. It was a sales pitch, but I was like, that's the other department.
Do you have an appointment?
I didn't even get that far because I knew he didn't. He basically was like, I've tried to talk to them, but they don't want to, I want to work with you. But that's not how this works. You don't get to decide who you want to work with and then interrupt their day. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, we're wasting all kinds of people's times because apparently you aren't the decision maker. It's not your department.
It doesn't matter.
It does,
It wasn't my job. I could have made a recommendation, but it didn't matter. I
did
would never
all
have
the
stepped
wrong
on their
things.
toes because I trust them to do their job. I was so frustrated by the audacity, but part of me also was slightly respectful.
Let's talk a little bit. I'm interviewing you now because I want to know who won Kendra's book. Who was the right salesperson that worked for you? Tell me a little bit about what that looked like.
I believe I told him that I would like to be a rock star, but we don't always get what we want, and he needs to deal with the people that he can deal with. I was so angry. At the university, I worked with Clear Channel, now iHeart, and together we put together the first integrated marketing campaign that went over years in multiple markets because they had representation in all the markets. We got to do all these cool, innovative crossover kind of stuff for the university because they had taken the time, they built the relationships. The two women that were selling for that and their male counterpart there too took the time, like listened, understood my goals. They brought something forward that they knew would appeal to my need to take little risks within the boundaries of the university, do something new and innovative that would help us achieve our goals. They had numbers to back it up. But first, they took the time to learn what I wanted and then come up with something creative that
They
was
helped you come up
not
with a
done
plan.
before.
They merchandised a service for you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
in sales, they figured out what you needed and solved a problem. They
100%.
also laid out a plan that made it easy for you to say yes.
They knew my pain points too, right? I was running multi-million-dollar campaigns on a very small department. So you can't provide something that's going to add more load to a department that I can't get any increased headcount for, right? Like they understood all of the pain
The
points
boundaries.
and created that to help alleviate adding any extra work. It was brilliant what they did. So that's who won.
That's who I like to be when I grow up, the kind of salesperson that I want to be. I don't want to be the person knocking down the door and wasting your time. I want to be the person who brings you something that you need. The fun part about changing products over the years is I feel like I've been very fortunate to continue to rise in luxury goods versus more broad spectrum everyday construction materials that you might find in a home center. And with every step up in luxury materials, I find that I love the limited clientele. It just makes me happier. I'd rather target the people who I know I'm bringing something to their table and I don't have to worry about the mass market stuff anymore. As I've gotten older, it's a nicer rat race to belong to.
Yeah. So I really want to know, Allison, for the viewer, for the people tuning in, listening on YouTube, what advice do you have who's I want to learn how to sell without feeling salesy? I want to be that unmarketing marketer, like you mentioned earlier.
I talk a lot about mentorship, and the best thing for your average person who doesn't want to invest in an amazing training program that might be available online, the best thing is to find a mentor, find somebody who you're willing to put in the work to be a little bit more like them. That includes for business owners too. We don't do networking for no reason at all. Networking isn't just about building connections in the industry that you're in. Networking is also about finding co-ops and people who are just like you and being able to have coffee with that person and have a real conversation. I volunteer with a lot of women in construction organizations. In several of them, we have mentorship programs. I volunteer in that. I've been a mentee and I am a mentor. I've got two right now in different parts of the country and in different roles. And I learn from those people just as much as they learn from me. So it's typically a win-win for everybody. We meet once a month. I ask the mentee to come up with some questions so we can have a strong conversation that's also solution based to something that
Mhm.
they want to learn. I think that's really easy for any level of person wanting to get into sales to do. You just got to be willing to put in the research to find the person you want to be like.
Yeah. What's going to help you? Allison, I love this conversation. I've taken a lot of your time. We've gone over the normal length because I've really enjoyed even the sidetracks a little bit because I think it's important because in my mind, the whole conversation has been around respecting and honoring the people you're talking to, respecting them enough to learn how to communicate in the way they want to be communicated with, and offering the value you can bring to help solve those problems and make the sale without being salesy.
I think we just found a good subtitle for the podcast.
I know you said you don't want to be salesy, but please plug your books because
Oh,
people want to read them.
okay. So the first book I wrote, it's an hour read. It really won't even take you that long. But I got friends who have Post-it notes positioned throughout the book. It's called The Art of Selling. We make order makers, not order takers, because I believe in creating business, not waiting for business to come to you. My second book will be out in November, and it's called Beyond Order Makers. This is for the entrepreneur and small business person. I had a lot of questions come up in the last year and a half about branding, brand strategy, and business owners that don't have time to sell. They don't know what to do, how to get more organized, their target marketing, and where they should be spending their time. I've got a lot of tips on that stuff. Beyond Order Makers will be out November 20th. I'm super excited. I think it's a great expansion on certain topics from the first book. It's about the person who's trying to learn how to be able to sell and what things you can put in place to help you do your job. Just be that entrepreneur, a small business person.
Thank you so much for being here, Allison. I've loved our conversation. And for those of you tuning in, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Allison's been great at bringing up really important insights, especially when it comes to sales and when it comes to marketing, because there are so many people who say, I don't want to do sales. I'm afraid of sales. I'm not a salesperson. And they have that used car image. And Allison's here to show you that you don't have to be that used car image. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I'm your host, Kendra Losee. If you are inspired or learned anything, please leave a comment. We'd love to hear
Let us
more
know.
and keep this conversation going. Until next time, thank you.